Police responded to a report of a deceased person with major injury at a Yankton, South Dakota home. The request for law enforcement came from friends of 41-year-old Heather Ann Bodden, who had found the woman's decapitated body after becoming concerned for her well-being and going to the residence to check on her. One of Bodden's friends told police that they had received a text message from the victim the previous day stating that her boyfriend, 32-year-old Craig Allen Nichols Jr., had threatened her with a weapon. Surveillance footage reportedly showed Nichols come in and go into the apartment several times during the early morning hours, after two other men were seen leaving the address. Both of the men told detectives that they had used drugs with Bodden and Nichols at the residence, and that Bodden was alive when they left at around 11 p.m. While searching Bodden's apartment, police found the victim's head inside of a garbage bag, along with a trove of evidence including wet shoes covered in a reddish-brown substance, and a garbage bag filled with 3 weapons wrapped inside of a floor mat. There was also a plastic bag containing bloody male clothing, including a pair of underwear with a label reading Craig N. Officers paid a visit to Nichols' last known address and found him barricaded inside his home. They eventually took him into custody after forcing their way into the apartment. Nichols invoked his right to an attorney when investigators attempted to interview him and was reportedly uncooperative after law enforcement obtained a warrant for a blood and urine sample. He pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder, second-degree murder, first-degree manslaughter, and 2 counts of contempt of court. Under South Dakota law, Nichols could receive the death penalty if convicted of the first-degree murder charge. Records show that he's been held at the Yankton County Jail in lieu of $1 million cash bail. Number 29. Dafne Michelle Davila. At around 3:30 a.m. on Sunday, January 5th, law enforcement responded to a domestic violence call at a home in El Paso County, Texas. The caller, 27-year-old Dafne Michelle Davila, pleaded for help, telling the dispatcher that her ex-boyfriend, 30-year-old Jorge Albert Chavez, had punched her and was breaking down the door of a room that she was hiding in a haunting 911 recording. Davila could be heard screaming while what sounded like a brutal assault took place. All communication with the dispatcher stopped and was followed by the sounds of loud thuds and labored breathing. As a sheriff's deputy arrived at the scene, he noticed a man who was later identified as Chavez leaving in a pickup truck. He parked behind the truck and ordered Chavez out of the vehicle, but Chavez ignored the cop's instructions and reversed into his patrol car to push it out of the way before fleeing the scene. Inside the residence, the deputy found Davila lying in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor with a knife stuck in her throat. She was conscious and gasping for breath but died from her injuries after being rushed to a nearby hospital. Davila and Chavez had a tumultuous history and had broken up at some point before the killing. In another early morning domestic dispute that occurred roughly 5 months prior to Davila's murder, she had accused Chavez of beating her while intoxicated during an argument about witchcraft. Police arrested Chavez on a misdemeanor family violence charge following the incident, and he was released later that day after posting a $1,500 bond. The case was ongoing at the time of Davila's death. Following the stabbing, Chavez was arrested without incident during a traffic stop in Reeves County, roughly 200 miles from the crime scene. He was extradited to El Paso County, where he remains in custody with bond set at $1 million. Number 28. Killing spree in North Carolina. On January 10th, 911 dispatchers in Pitt County, North Carolina, received an emergency call from T.D. Gribble. His parents, 80-year-old Anthony and 76-year-old Paula Gribble, had been shot to death by a home intruder who was leaving the Greenville residence when T.D. arrived. Gribble held the suspect at gunpoint until police arrived at the scene and identified him as 55-year-old David Lever, a local realtor who had helped his parents when they bought their home and who struggled with substance abuse issues. At around the same time that morning, 64-year-old retired college professor Enrique Reyes was found dead in his driveway just a few miles from the Gribbles' home. He had been shot multiple times, and it appeared to be no coincidence that he was Lever's neighbor. Lever was charged with 3 counts of murder and has remained held without bond while investigators worked to identify a motive for the killings. While executing a search warrant, police found over 50 firearms inside his house and vehicle, along with evidence that a gun had recently been discharged into the floor. Investigators also learned that Lever had stopped at a gas station and fired gunshots during his crime spree. Luckily, no one was harmed. Lever was also accused of knocking on the door of a third residence and leaving when no one answered. Neighbors who saw him backing out of the driveway told police that they didn't recognize him as anyone they had previously seen at the home. Records show a history of mental health and domestic violence-related calls at Lever's home dating back to August of 2023, but his reasons for targeting the murder victims remain unclear. In May, a news update revealed that Lever had been found unable to proceed in court following a competency evaluation, putting the proceedings on hold indefinitely while he undergoes treatment. Number 27. The Powell family triple homicide. On the afternoon of January 9th, police in Louisiana's St. Helena Parish responded to a domestic disturbance where they found 3 people murdered. 40-year-old Rhonda Powell, her pre-teen son, Braylon, and her infant nephew, Hayden, had all been stabbed to death. Investigators identified the alleged killer as 31-year-old Ryant Jones, who was Powell's brother and Hayden's father. Jones reportedly has a history of schizophrenia and was experiencing a mental health episode at the time of the triple murder. Just a day before the killings, family members had tried to get help for him after he became aggressive and paranoid. Relatives urged a doctor to administer a medication injection, which had a history of effectively treating the suspect's symptoms, but the doctor gave him a pill instead. The family also attempted to get Jones involuntarily committed to a mental health facility, but he was ultimately sent home. During an interview with local reporters, Powell's cousin expressed her belief that the victims would still be alive if Jones had been committed. Jones was detained on a first-degree murder charge following his arrest, but no longer appears to be in custody. In the meantime, updates have not been forthcoming, leaving the current status of the case unclear. Number 26. Noah Scurry. As a varsity basketball star with the highest SAT score in his class, 17-year-old high school senior Noah Scurry was on the track to success, but his promising future was ripped away from him on the morning of Tuesday, January 14th, when he was shot dead in an alleyway behind his Philadelphia home as he left for school. Police speculated that the shooting was targeted and believe a white Jeep Cherokee was used in the crime, but they have yet to identify any suspects or a motive. According to investigators, 2 individuals jumped out of the vehicle and shot at Scurry, with the possibility that there was a third suspect behind the wheel. Scurry had previously been a victim in a shooting that took place in 2023 and which left a 60-year-old man dead. But authorities have not said whether they think the incident was related to Scurry's death. According to law enforcement, Scurry had been seen holding guns and wearing a Joker mask in a rap video that was posted online the day before he was killed. In February, Philadelphia native Gilly the Kid told fellow podcaster Shannon Sharp that he believes there's a connection between Scurry's death and the murder of his son, who was fatally shot in 2023. Both shootings appear to remain unsolved, and police have not confirmed whether they believe the 2 incidents are connected. Number 25. Bryana Raye. While responding to a report of gunshots at a New Britain, Connecticut home on the night of January 27th, police found the murdered body of 30-year-old Bryana Raye, who had been stabbed to death in a bedroom, and her mother, who was suffering from a gunshot wound to the shoulder. Bryana was pronounced dead at the scene after life-saving efforts failed, and her mother was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The emergency call came from a woman in Pennsylvania who told law enforcement that she was talking on the phone with Brianna's mother when she overheard a domestic dispute followed by screaming and 4 to 6 loud bangs. Responding officers also spoke with a male relative who was playing video games when the deadly altercation occurred. He described overhearing a gunshot, then seeing Brianna's husband, 45-year-old Christopher Raye, on top of Bryana and stabbing her repeatedly with a bloody knife while the couple's 2 children looked on. The witness ushered the kids into another room and yelled at Christopher to leave the house. Christopher heeded the order and fled in his pickup truck with his cell phones turned off. During the early morning hours, he called a colleague and said that he had done something unnormal and that something crazy happened. Police found Christopher walking along a road later that day and took him into custody. He was charged with a slew of felonies, including murder, first-degree assault with a firearm, 2 counts of risk of injury to a child, criminal possession of a firearm, and criminal use of a weapon, along with 1 misdemeanor count of illegal discharge of a firearm. Christopher Raye has a lengthy record of criminal convictions dating back to the late 90s, including for strangulation, kidnapping, burglary, and making threats. He was detained on $1 million bail and remains in custody amid the ongoing case. Number 24. Zariah Dodd. Shortly before 6 a.m. on July 5th, officers responded to a report of unknown trouble at Maryview Park in Phoenix, Arizona. A dog walker had found 16-year-old Zariah F. Dodd dead from a gunshot wound to the head. A subsequent autopsy revealed that she was nearly 6 months pregnant when she was killed. In early August, police announced the arrests of 36-year-old Jarrell Davis and 18-year-old Jackree James Gillette in connection with the case. Both men were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count each of obstruction and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Davis, who is the father of Dodd's unborn child, faces additional charges for having an inappropriate relationship with the victim and being a felon in possession of a weapon. According to court documents, Dodd had left the group home where she was living at 8 p.m. on July 4th with plans to meet with Davis. Prior to the killing, investigators were planning to forensically interview Dodd regarding their suspicions that Davis had engaged in unlawful contact with her. Authorities say that James Gillette, who was dating Dodd at the time of her death, picked her up at the residence and took her to the park, while witnesses and video evidence also connected Davis to the crime. Davis has a history of having illegal relationships with underage girls, including a criminal conviction in 2008 for impregnating a minor when he was 19 years old, resulting in a 10-year probation sentence. His past could be used against him by prosecutors, which means he could face a maximum sentence of life without parole or even the death penalty if convicted as charged. The accused predator is also facing allegations that he asked an underage female in Avondale, who had an order of protection against him, for inappropriate photos in 2024. In a complaint to the police, the girl's mother claimed that her daughter and Davis had run away together months earlier. She accused Davis of manipulating and coercing her daughter while she was at work, and Davis allegedly controlled every aspect of the teen's life, including when she could eat and shower. Both suspects are currently in custody at the Maricopa County Jail with bonds set at $1 million each. Number 23. Montana bar shooting. On the morning of Friday, August 1st, a gunman opened fire at the Owl Bar in Anaconda, Montana, killing 59-year-old Daniel Edwin Bailey, 70-year-old David Allen Leach, 74-year-old Tony Wayne Palm, and the bartender, 64-year-old Nancy Loretta Kelly. It was the state's deadliest shooting since 2015, leaving the tightly knit community shaken. The suspect, a 45-year-old mentally ill Army veteran named Michael Paul Brown, was identified with help from the public after police released a surveillance still image of him that was captured shortly after the massacre. Brown appears mostly unclothed in the photo, which was taken after he went to a second location and discarded his clothing and some personal belongings. He went on to steal a vehicle filled with camping equipment and remains at large after being last seen on the day of the shooting. A manhunt is ongoing, leaving the public on edge, especially due to the completely unprovoked nature of the quadruple homicide. Authorities are reportedly struggling to locate Brown due to the inhospitable terrain and vast wilderness that spans the region, as well as the head start he received by committing the murders in an area with limited law enforcement, and the need to call in assistance from distant agencies including the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Hundreds of people from 38 local, state, and federal agencies participated in the search for Brown. On August the 8th, a week after the shooting, Brown was apprehended in the same town where the killings occurred. Local officials announced his arrest during the early afternoon, but have provided few other details, including Brown's alleged motive and what charges he'll be facing. Number 22. Reagan Wilson. Two lives were lost in early June when a 21-year-old pregnant woman named Reagan Wilson was fatally shot inside her Lebanon, Missouri home. Hoping to save the baby's life, emergency responders rushed Reagan to a nearby hospital where doctors performed an emergency delivery of her child. Her son, Silas, succumbed to his injuries 8 days later. Police soon learned that the victim had separated from her estranged husband, 25-year-old Sidney Wilson V, in late 2024. Just hours before the killing, Sidney had received a Facebook message instructing him and his family to stay away from Reagan and her unborn child. He was arrested on July 31st, nearly 2 months after the shooting, and is facing 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of armed criminal action. A probable cause affidavit states that Sidney turned up at the hospital where his son was being treated in the days following Reagan's death, but he showed no interest in the investigation and only seemed to care about when he would be able to get his vehicle back from law enforcement. He reportedly acknowledged that his marriage to Reagan was strained and admitted to owning the same kind of gun that was used in the crime, but claimed that he had sold it to an unknown individual who randomly approached him at a restaurant months earlier. But the evidence suggested otherwise, according to detectives, who said that surveillance footage showed Sidney eating alone and not interacting with any fellow customers on the day of the supposed gun sale. Law enforcement identified additional discrepancies in Sidney's timeline and version of events, including evidence that he manually turned off his GPS while driving toward Lebanon on the night of Reagan's murder. He's currently being held without bond at the Laclede County Jail as he awaits his next court hearing, and authorities have appealed to the public for additional information as the investigation continues. Number 21. Angela Byrd. On Sunday, July 20th, police performed a late-night welfare check at the Bexar County, Texas home of 44-year-old Angela Byrd after a relative reported receiving disturbing comments from the woman's husband, 49-year-old Charles Byrd. Responding officers quickly noticed the smell of decomposition upon entering the home, where they found Angela's body wrapped in plastic. Believing that Angela had been murdered, law enforcement immediately began searching for Charles, who was found hiding inside a home roughly a mile from the crime scene. He was surprisingly forthcoming as he told investigators that he killed Angela during a physical confrontation more than a month earlier, after he arrived home early and noticed perceived signs that she was planning to have another man over. Convinced that his wife was cheating, Charles choked his wife until she was unresponsive and bit her in the face several times. For the next 32 days, he continued to live in the home with Angela's corpse while taking measures to mask the smell and attempting to explain away the odor to relatives. During that time, he discarded a garbage bag of decomposition fluid into a dumpster outside a local school where he worked as a plumber. A law enforcement spokesperson described Charles as very matter-of-fact during his interview with police, at one point mentioning that he had no criminal history before nonchalantly stating, "Go big or go home." The seemingly flippant comment shocked even the most seasoned investigators with decades of experience. Charles Byrd faces multiple charges, including murder and 2 counts of tampering with evidence with intent to impair a human corpse. He's currently being held at the Bexar County Jail on bonds totaling $650,000. Number 20. Rachel Prince. While responding to an unknown complaint at a Columbus, Ohio home on the afternoon of Sunday, July 13th, police found the murdered body of 46-year-old schoolteacher and mother of 2, Rachel Prince. She had been strangled to death and had also suffered blunt force injuries to her head and arms. During the investigation that ensued, detectives discovered that Prince's live-in boyfriend, 37-year-old Jason Palmer, had been seen standing over the victim's unresponsive body and dragging her inside the house the previous night. No one else was seen coming or going from the apartment until 7 a.m. the next morning when Palmer left the residence. Palmer had a history of physical abuse against Prince, including an arrest for felony assault in September of 2024. He pleaded guilty to a reduced misdemeanor domestic violence charge in June of 2025, roughly a month before the killing, and was sentenced to time served. Records also reportedly show that Palmer was arrested in another domestic violence incident against Prince in late 2023. In that case, he was accused of threatening to kill the entire household, including Prince's 2 children, and leaving visible injuries on Prince's neck. He was convicted of aggravated menacing and ordered to stay away from the victims until May of this year. In January of 2024, Prince asked the court to lift her restraining order against Palmer. The judge denied the request, and Palmer subsequently fell out of touch with his probation officer, but the court extended his probation to 2026 instead of placing him in jail, despite allegations of at least 8 supervision violations. Following Prince's death, Palmer was booked into the Franklin County Jail, where he remains in custody on suspicion of murder, strangulation, and domestic violence assault. Number 19. Craig Hameister. Shortly before 5 p.m. on June 18th, Wabasha County Sheriff's deputies responded to a medical call at a Kellogg, Minnesota home where they encountered a woman suffering from severe facial injuries, including a missing portion of her jaw. Later identified as 36-year-old Melissa Nicole Hunt, she told law enforcement that her boyfriend, 44-year-old Craig Allen Hameister, had hit her in the face with a stick at a nearby boat launch. The victim was then rushed to the hospital where she died from her injuries less than 2 hours later. Using information gleaned from their brief conversation with Hunt, police spotted Hameister's truck outside a residence just outside Chatfield, roughly 40 miles south of the crime scene. The homeowners told detectives that Hameister had left the truck there after showing up in a frantic state and warning them that the cops would be coming because something bad happened. He fled the home on a motorcycle after stealing a resident's 9mm handgun and was found hiding in a tree after running into a wooded area. An hours-long standoff ensued before he was finally apprehended and booked into the Wabasha County Jail, where he remains in custody in lieu of $2 million bail. He pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder while committing a felony, and first-degree manslaughter for intentionally causing death in the heat of passion. Number 18. Yuleisy Carolina Torrelles Martinez. During the early morning hours of April 5th, police found the murdered body of 21-year-old Yuleisy Carolina Torrelles Martinez stuffed into a futon inside her Philadelphia apartment. Officers made the discovery while performing a welfare check at the request of the victim's friends, who became concerned after not hearing from her for several days. Martinez had been stabbed several times in the neck and torso before being wrapped in a shower curtain and hidden in the furniture. She worked as a waitress and had been living in Philadelphia for less than a year at the time of her death. A few days later, police publicly identified 28-year-old Torrelles Sanchez Reyes as a suspect in the crime, and a warrant was issued for her arrest. Law enforcement officials did not specify whether the two women knew each other or go into detail about the circumstances leading up to the murder, but they appealed to the public for information regarding the accused perpetrator's whereabouts. In late June, the U.S. Marshals Service announced that Sanchez Reyes had been arrested in Madrid, Spain. Authorities are reportedly in the process of extraditing her to Pennsylvania to face a murder charge and other related crimes. Number 17. Henry County double homicide. On a Tuesday afternoon in late July, police responded to a Henry County, Virginia home where they found 68-year-old William Leroy Morey dead from multiple gunshot wounds. He had been killed after stopping at the residence to check on 22-year-old Mandy Michelle Coleman, who was found dead inside the house from a single gunshot wound to the head. Investigators quickly identified Mandy's husband, 30-year-old Joshua Corbett Coleman, as a suspect in the double homicide. He had fled the scene with the couple's 2 children, immediately triggering a multi-agency manhunt. Less than 2 hours later, police conducted a traffic stop on Joshua's vehicle and found the children unharmed. The suspect was armed with an AR-15 and a handgun, but was arrested without incident. Joshua reportedly admitted to killing his wife and Morey, telling law enforcement that he had shot Mandy in the head during an argument about his suspicions that she was cheating. He then placed the children in the car and looked for Morey, who was at the house when he returned. Following his arrest, Joshua was booked into the Henry County Adult Detention Center without bond. He faces 2 counts each of first-degree murder, use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, and child neglect, along with 1 count of shooting from an occupied vehicle. Number 16. Evelie LaCroix. While responding to a reported shooting at a Plainfield, Illinois home on June 27th, police found a woman suffering from a bullet wound in her bedroom and a man covered in blood nearby. Identified as Evelie LaCroix, the victim was pronounced dead at the scene. Her estranged husband, 47-year-old Steve Chavanis, was handcuffed to a stretcher and taken to the emergency room with a head wound. While hospitalized, Chavanis confessed to shooting LaCroix, who had an order of protection against him, after she kicked him out of their home. When asked about his motive for the crime, he reportedly said, "Because she was disrespecting me." He also admitted to shooting LaCroix with the intent to kill her and asked the police to tell the victim's daughter that he was sorry for what he had done. The victim's daughter told police that LaCroix had told Chavanis to move out after he became violent on a number of occasions, including an incident where he allegedly stabbed his wife with a screwdriver. Chavanis was released from the hospital a few days later and booked into jail on charges of murder, burglary with a deadly weapon, and domestic battery in violation of a protective order. Number 15. Lontray Clark. Enraged by a rumor that his friend may have started dating his ex-girlfriend, an Illinois man set fire to an apartment building in Chicago's Austin neighborhood with a Molotov cocktail on June 26th. The structure erupted into flames, leaving 4 people dead and several injured, while dozens of residents were displaced by the blaze. Later identified as 23-year-old Lontray Clark of Springfield, he did not kill the intended targets. The victims were identified as 76-year-old Brad Cummins, 27-year-old Destiny Henry, 32-year-old Regina Brown Henry, who was 3 months pregnant at the time of her death, and Henry's young son. According to police, Clark picked up his cousin and drove to a gas station where he filled a container with gasoline. He then went to a convenience store where he purchased black clothing, a mask, and a lighter. Clark's cousin told law enforcement that they proceeded to drive to the apartment building where Clark started the fire, then to the suspect's grandfather's house where he disposed of his clothing. Clark had 2 outstanding warrants for resisting arrest when the arson occurred. He also has a prior weapon-related conviction, but his defense attorney argued in court that he's not violent and that there's no surveillance footage of him setting the building on fire. The defendant is being held without bond on multiple felony charges, including first-degree murder and aggravated arson. Number 14. Sandra Gilworth. An elderly Missouri man is maintaining his innocence in court after being accused of killing his wife and setting their Unionville home on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Charges against 72-year-old Danny Gilworth were filed in June after the victim, 70-year-old Sandra Gilworth, was found dead with gunshot wounds inside the residence the previous month. Officers discovered the victim's body while responding to a report that the home had been set ablaze. A concerned civilian told law enforcement that when they tried getting inside, Danny had opened his front door and pointed a gun at them while saying, "I started the damn fire myself." Gilworth pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder, second-degree arson, armed criminal action, unlawful use of a weapon, and tampering with evidence. He remains held without bond at the Putnam County Jail. Number 13. Marlene Fladland. In early July, police responded to a home in Clark, South Dakota, where they found the murdered body of 70-year-old Marlene Fladland buried in the front yard. She had been strangled and decapitated by her own son, 34-year-old Bowen Fladland, who admitted to kneeling on his mother's neck until she was dead. While court documents did not clarify an alleged motive for the killing, Bowen has a documented history of assaulting the victim. In 2023, he was accused of grabbing Marlene by the throat in 2 separate consecutive incidents that occurred over a 2-day period. He also threatened to kill the victim with butter knives. Bowen was convicted of aggravated battery in that case and received a 10-year suspended sentence. Records show that he's currently in the custody of the Cauthen County Sheriff's Office, with bonds set at $500,000. He has since been indicted on a first-degree murder charge and will face a mandatory life sentence without parole if convicted as charged. Number 12. Darius Timberlake. During the early morning hours of April 23rd, officers responded to a Lawrence, Indiana home where they found 19-year-old Jeremy Jett on the back step with a Glock handgun nearby. Jett reportedly said it was an accident and was handcuffed while police investigated the property. In a nearby shed, they found 26-year-old Darius Timberlake dead with multiple gunshot wounds. Further investigation revealed that Jett had shown up at the house and found his girlfriend in bed with the victim. According to authorities, Jett fought with Timberlake over a gun before the deadly shots were fired. He claimed that the shooting was an accident and was not formally charged until 2 months later. During the investigation, police spoke with Jett's girlfriend, who said that the suspect had been accusing her of cheating in the weeks leading up to the shooting. She also told law enforcement that she was seeing multiple partners and that she had told Jett not to show up at the residence unannounced. In early July, Jeremy Jett was booked into the Marion County Jail, where he remains held on murder and residential entry charges. Number 11. Rana Nofal Soluri. Months after an American Airlines flight attendant disappeared in Fort Worth, Texas, her roommate confessed to killing her and throwing her body off a bridge. 47-year-old Rana Nofal Soluri had taken a leave of absence from her job when she last spoke with a co-worker on March 19th. She never returned to work later that month as planned, and on June 11th, her co-worker reported her missing. In footage that was handed over to police, Soluri's roommate, 66-year-old Dennis William Day, could reportedly be heard yelling at her in the background. The ominous video showed Soluri's handgun laying on her bed. Day initially denied any involvement with Soluri's death. Upon being confronted with surveillance footage, which appeared to show him dragging a lifeless body into his backyard, he confessed to strangling his roommate to death in a rage after she video recorded him during an argument. He further admitted to throwing Soluri's corpse and cell phone into a river and getting rid of her belongings in the days following her death. Day directed police to a storm drain, where they found the victim's gun, and was subsequently booked into custody on a murder charge. He's currently being held at the Tarrant County Jail in lieu of a $200,000 bond. Number 10. Danielle Crosbie-Davidson. On June 11th, 38-year-old Danielle Crosbie-Davidson was found dead in her room at a hospice facility in Maricopa County, Arizona. Her tongue was blue, and the staff noticed suspicious bruising on her neck. Suspicion immediately turned to Danielle's husband, 46-year-old Justin Davidson, who had been staying with his wife in her room at the time of her death. Employees had noticed a significant decline in Danielle's health since her husband arrived, and they told police about other suspicious behaviors. Justin had reportedly told staff members that he did not want them to feed his wife and started locking the door to her room, interfering with employees' ability to check on Danielle. According to police, Justin admitted to a previous failed attempt to kill Danielle by purposely overdosing her with 50 to 60 OxyContin pills. On the day of Danielle's death, he fed his wife a blue drink containing dissolved over-the-counter sleeping pills, then smothered her with a pillow until she stopped breathing. He's now facing a first-degree murder charge and is in custody at the Maricopa County Jail while awaiting trial, which is tentatively scheduled for February of 2026. Number 9. Paul and Joanne Hait. On the evening of January 26th, sheriff's deputies in Dutchess County, New York, were summoned to a residential fire in the town of Wappingers Falls, where emergency responders managed to extinguish the blaze. Inside the burned home, police found the bodies of 63-year-old Paul Hait, his wife, 65-year-old Joanne, and their pet dog. They had been fatally shot before the home was doused with gasoline and torched in an attempt to destroy evidence. Following an investigation, prosecutors charged the couple's son-in-law, 34-year-old Robert J. Budder, on charges of first-degree murder, 2 counts of second-degree murder, 3 arson counts, aggravated cruelty to animals, evidence tampering and other related crimes. During a search of his vehicle, police found the suspected murder weapon, bloody clothing, and other evidence pointing toward his involvement in the double homicide. Butter, a Florida resident, is reportedly married to Hait's daughter, but authorities have not named an alleged motive or gone into detail about the circumstances leading up to the killings. He was indicted on the charges in early March and remains held without bail as the case continues. Number 8. Mary Ogle. On January 17th, 79-year-old Terry Allen Ogle dialed 911 and confessed to killing his wife, 76-year-old Mary Ogle, at the couple's Indianapolis home. When the dispatchers asked if he wanted to try CPR, he replied, "She's been down for a while," and that it was too late. Responding officers found Mary covered in a blanket and bleeding from a head wound. She was pronounced dead at the scene, and Terry was arrested for his wife's murder after being treated for a laceration to his wrist. During his conversations with law enforcement, Terry went into detail about the circumstances surrounding the crime, explaining that he didn't snap, but had recently been suffering from depression. Suspecting that Mary was having an affair, he bludgeoned her to death with a hammer. Records show that he's been detained without bond at the Marion County Jail. Number 7. Attilio Cecchetto. 77-year-old Sam Atto Timaloa was on parole for previous violent crimes when he was arrested in early August for beating his 92-year-old roommate to death at an assisted living facility in Riverside County, California back in May. Police were called to the residence at around 2 in the morning after Timaloa caused severe injuries to the victim, Attilio Cecchetto. Initial reports stated that Cecchetto was taken to the hospital in critical but stable condition, but he succumbed to his injuries several days later. Timaloa was released from prison in early 2024 after serving part of a 23-year sentence for multiple crimes, including attempted murder with a domestic violence allegation. After assaulting Cecchetto, he was charged with attempted murder, elder abuse resulting in great bodily injury, felony assault, and parole violations. Now that the victim has died, it remains unclear whether prosecutors plan to upgrade Timaloa's charges to murder. During a recent court hearing, the judge granted the defense's request for the defendant to undergo a competency exam to gauge whether he may be eligible for treatment at a state hospital, which would effectively put the proceedings on hold indefinitely. Number 6. James Bartholomew Bart Cauthen. A Georgia fire chief paid with his life after stopping to help a man who had hit a deer with his car in Chambers County, Alabama, on January 19th. With no cell phone reception, 54-year-old James Bartholomew Bart Cauthen and the stranded motorist walked to a nearby home together in search of assistance while the man's wife waited in their car. The man who lived at the residence, 34-year-old William Randall Franklin, allegedly opened fire on the men in an unprovoked fashion and without warning, leading to a shootout between the two parties. Cauthen died from his injuries at the scene. The driver and Franklin were also shot but survived after being rushed to the emergency room for treatment, and the driver's wife was uninjured. Following his release from the hospital, Franklin was arrested in Muskogee County, Georgia, on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. He was then extradited to Chambers County, but updates have not been forthcoming, leaving the current status of the case unclear. Number 5. Kenneth Lamar Richards. While responding to a reported shooting in Fort Wayne, Indiana, on the morning of January 14th, police found 53-year-old Kenneth Lamar Richards suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. He was pronounced dead at the scene after life-saving efforts failed to revive him. Also present was the 911 caller and suspected killer, 24-year-old Kenneth King, who was taken into custody at the scene. According to court documents, Richards became angry and threatened King after finding him in a garage, where the suspect was tinkering with the electricity in an attempt to heat up some food. King retrieved his firearm from an upstairs room and returned to the garage, where he and Richards fought over the gun. He claimed he had shot Richards in self-defense, but is accused of continuing to shoot the victim even after he was able to escape the situation. Authorities claim that King showered before calling 911, heightening their suspicions of foul play. He was booked into the Allen County Jail on the day of the shooting and remains held without bond on suspicion of murder and an OWI charge. Number 4. Rosnieri Mejia Magana. 42-year-old Rosnieri Mejia Magana fled Honduras to escape violence, but was murdered at his Montgomery, Alabama home in a tragic twist of irony earlier this year. He was heading to work on the morning of January 8th when a burglar entered his residence at the Evergreen Estates Mobile Home Park shortly after 6 a.m. and shot him in the face. Magana died from his injuries, leaving behind a pregnant wife and 3 children. A relative, Karen Montoya, told local station WSFA that the family had been living in the United States for around 5 years prior to Maganya's murder. She said that the family no longer feels safe living in the US, where they had sought refuge from the dangers of their home country. At the time the story broke, the investigation was ongoing, but the case appears to remain unsolved. Number 3. Stanley Taylor. At around 10:30 a.m. on the morning of January 13th, police responded to a medical emergency at a residence in Boca Raton, Florida, where they found 67-year-old Stanley Taylor suffering from 2 stab wounds to the torso. Stanley's wife, 58-year-old Terry Taylor, had gone to a neighbor and asked them to call 911, claiming that her husband had fallen on a knife while cutting something in the kitchen. But Stanley offered a much different version of events while still clinging to life, telling police that Terry had attacked him and was trying to kill him. When confronted by investigators, Terry admitted that the couple had gotten into a physical altercation during an argument over a stereo system. She claimed that Stanley had stabbed himself, but investigators concluded that she had stabbed her husband with a cane that was equipped with an illegal bladed attachment. Stanley ultimately succumbed to his injuries and Terry was booked into the Palm Beach County Jail, where she remains in custody on a homicide charge. Number 2. Enese Pierre. Shortly before 3 a.m. on January 5th, police in Davenport, Florida, responded to a 911 call from a young girl who reported that her mother had been stabbed and that her stepfather was armed with a knife. Deputies found the girl's mother, Enese Pierre, and Pierre's husband, 45-year-old Mackinson DeValsin, unresponsive in a bedroom with bleeding neck wounds. There was also a bloody knife at the scene which had been removed from the kitchen. Pierre was pronounced dead at the scene while DeValkin survived after being treated for a similar injury. Investigators spoke with Pierre's daughter, who said she had overheard her mother screaming for help shortly after returning home at 1:40 a.m. An adult roommate told detectives that she had tried to intervene but was pushed away by DeValkin. Following his release from the hospital, DeValkin was booked into the Osceola County Jail on a premeditated first-degree murder charge. He remains held without bond amid the ongoing case, and authorities have yet to reveal an alleged motive for the crime. Number 1. Robert Krusanowski. An innocent man was murdered in cold blood at a Kissimmee, Florida hotel in January after another guest was told to leave and went on a violent rampage. Detectives arrived at the Quality Inn to find the suspect, 25-year-old Piero Estefano Boot Castillo, with his hands covered in blood, and the victim, 55-year-old Robert Krusanowski, dead with significant trauma to his head, face, and neck. According to police, Boot Castillo had been living at the hotel for several months, but had just been told that he could no longer extend his stay. He erupted into a tirade on the 3rd floor, destroying property and smashing windows in occupied rooms. Krusanowski, who was also a long-term resident at the hotel, reportedly tried to de-escalate the situation and was slammed to the ground and beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. Surveillance footage also showed the suspect beating and stomping on the victim's head as he lay motionless in the hallway. The attack was still in progress when law enforcement arrived at the scene and arrested Boot Castillo. Bond was denied and he remains behind bars at the Osceola County Jail on charges of murder, resisting an officer with violence, battery, and criminal mischief. Thanks for watching. Would you spend the rest of 2025 in isolation in return for perfect health for the next 5 years? Let us know in the comment section below.